So today I want to show you how a simple math rule that's able to predict patterns of the universe has also accurately tracked the last 15 years of Bitcoin's price. And I want to show you what this formula says Bitcoin should be worth 10 years from now. I know it sounds crazy, but check this out. It's math and science. Now, if a magician was to show you a deck of cards, at first you might look at it and see that it looks like a random shuffled deck of cards, and you wouldn't necessarily know its secrets, because the secret is that it's a stacked deck of cards, and it allows me to cut to a very specific playing card, like the King of Spades. Is that the King of Spades? Yeah, that would have been awkward. But when we look out at the universe, most of us see our lives as completely random. Like everything is chaos based on unpredictable systems that interact with each other in no specific way. But believe it or not, the universe is like a stacked deck of cards. It also has a pattern to it, except the universe is so big and so complex, we can't see those patterns, but they're there, hidden inside of mathematics in what are called power laws. Power laws can tell us how big earthquakes get, they can tell us how big cities get, they can be used to explain the distribution of wealth around the world, the popularity of words inside of books and languages, the size of brains versus the size of bodies, the length of roads in cities, the size of craters on the moon, and how long it takes for planets to orbit around the sun. Now, power laws help us find relationships between two very different things in a way that allows us to observe the past and make predictions about the future in everything, in biology, society, technology, and even financial markets. Now, an astrophysicist applied mathematics and recently discovered that Bitcoin has followed one of these laws of power. So if you're the kind of nerd that likes this stuff, let's do a deep dive from which there is no coming out of, and I'm going to show you how these laws of power describe the secrets of the universe and what it says Bitcoin's price could be worth at the next cycle peak and 10 years from now. So let's get into it. Hi, my name is Andrei Jikh. Hope you're doing well. Come for the finance and stay for the magic of the power laws. So let me give you an example of one of the coolest power laws from one of my favorite YouTubers of all time, Michael from Vsauce, and his video, The Ziff Mystery. Now, in his video, Michael explains that the most popular English words of all time are the, of, and to a, in, is, I, that it for you was with on as have but be they. Sounds like some sort of an old spell for a ritual, but believe it or not, if you graph the most popular words that are written or spoken, you'll start to see a pattern that you wouldn't think should be there. You'll find that the second most popular word will show up half as often as the first. The third most popular word will appear 1/3 as often as the first. The fourth word will appear 1/4 as often, and the fifth one as fifth as often, and so on and so forth for every single word. Each word's popularity is directly proportional to 1 divided by its rank. Now, if you plot this rank and frequency on a log-log chart, you'll see a perfectly straight line, revealing the clue that language is an example of a power law in action. Now, you might be thinking, okay, that's kind of a weird coincidence, but how is it useful that you can draw a straight line through a bunch of dots? It's useful because if you can find the exponential relationship between two different things, you can make some really accurate predictions about it. In Michael's video, he was able to guess that the word sauce should appear roughly 30,000 times between all its uses on Wikipedia and the Gutenberg project, and his guess came extremely close to reality. Now, this ability to make accurate predictions applies not just to the English language, but to every language in the world, including ancient languages we still haven't fully figured out. And the question is, how is something so humanly complex and so unique as language is easily predictable by mathematics? But now let's go a lot farther. Literally, let's go into deep space. An astronomer named Johannes Kepler discovered that there's a power law relationship between how far away a planet was from the sun and how long it took that planet to orbit around the sun. Turns out, knowing this secret power law allowed us to predict this motion for every single planet in our solar system. And the relationship there, once plotted, is again in a perfectly straight line. Why? Why is there a pattern to space rocks circling around a giant ball of fire? Shouldn't it be kind of random? You're probably like, what is this video about? Is this even about Bitcoin? How did I get lost in this YouTube recommended section at 2 a.m.? I promise I'll get to the Bitcoin part and connect the dots, but this is so much more interesting than Bitcoin because it gets even crazier. Almost exactly 414 years ago, in the year 1610, before Galileo found the answer to the question of what was at the center of our solar system and that the Earth orbited around the sun, he had a different question. Why weren't there really big animals? I mean, it's a good question. Like, what's the biggest animal could ever get? And using his early studies of animal data, he found that as an animal doubled in size, its mass increased by a factor of 8 times. And he also discovered that the bone area would only grow by 4 times. He calculated that if a gorilla got 10 times bigger, its mass would go up by 1,000 times, but its bone size would only go up by a factor of 100. So using this power law is how we're able to predict and understand that there's a physical limit to how big an animal could get, and beyond the limit, it would just crush itself underneath its own weight. And that's how we know that King Kong can't really exist, at least not with the gravity that's here on Earth. I mean, he might exist, I haven't seen him. Maybe he's an amphibian. But that's why the biggest living creature that has ever existed in the history of Earth is also underwater, the blue whale. Now, throughout the next few centuries, we keep on discovering these power laws, and 322 years later, in the year 1932, Max Kleiber discovered another power law. It was the metabolic rate, or the energy consumption of living things as it relates to their size. And when mapped out again on a log-log scale, it created a perfect line. Even brain size versus physical size was found to have a power law. And as Michael from Vsauce pointed out, power laws predicted a lot of other things as well, like solar flare intensities, protein sequences, the amount of views a website gets, how strong earthquakes are, how often academic papers are referenced, last names, the firing patterns of neural networks, ingredients used for cooking, the number of phone calls people get, the diameter of craters on the moon, how often people die in wars, chess move openers, and the rate at which people forget. And just in case you need more proof that we live in a simulation world governed by invisibly written laws, there's over 100 power laws that describe patterns in things that shouldn't exist. Patterns in artificial intelligence, astronomy, physics, psychology, biology, meteorology, mathematics, economics, and finance. So then the question is, can this model be used to predict the price of Bitcoin? And this is what I've been setting you up for this entire video. According to astrophysicist Giovanni Socials, who discovered this connection, he says that 15 years of data shows that Bitcoin also follows a power law principle. Giovanni's theory says that Bitcoin's price is not as random as it seems. There is randomness to it, but over the long term, Bitcoin's price follows a specific mathematical model. And it's not just a mathematical formula that some guy drew a line through, but instead, it follows a power law that are like the ones observed throughout the universe. Now, what I want to show you right now is a graph that's going to look kind of similar to what you might have seen before, but this one is not the stock to flow model. It's very different. So here's what it looks like. The yellow line represents the current price, the red line represents what's called the support line, which is the level Bitcoin usually never drops below, and it's been incredibly accurate. The green line is what's called the linear regression line, which you can think of sort of like the fair value price, where Bitcoin will eventually go back to, and the purple line is the resistance line that Bitcoin typically maxes out at. And this one is the hardest to predict. By the way, that chart that I just showed you is a log linear chart, which has been super useful in telling us where the bottom of Bitcoin is. And over the last 15 years, it's been scary accurate. Now, another chart that's a log chart, like the one that we see in power laws, is much more useful in telling us when Bitcoin's price could 10x and then 10x again and again. So let me show you that right now. The days on the x-axis start from the first block that was ever mined, called the Genesis block, which advances by a factor of 10. And the same is true for its price on the y-axis. And on this chart, you can see just how incredibly linear Bitcoin's growth has been, especially if you remove the outliers. Now, for Bitcoin, these outliers look really big. But the truth is, outliers exist in every system, but with enough data over time, they just become less noticeable. Now, if this sounds extremely confusing, because it does to me, I did get in touch with Giovanni, who has the PhD in astrophysics, who created all these charts and who noticed the relationship of the power law to Bitcoin, and here's what he said.
So the beauty of that is basically showing how Bitcoin is scaling up. So this concept of scale. A scale is these changes in order of magnitude, right? So you go from 1 to 10 to 100 to 1,000, right? It is important because Bitcoin went from being basically nothing, literally nothing, or a fraction of a dollar, right? And then it went to $1 and people got excited, and it went to 10 and 100,000, right? So in few years, in 15 years, it went up almost 6 orders of magnitude. That is amazing. Almost, I think actually no assets on Earth has done that in the history of mankind, but I know, right? And so it's important to look at the scale.
Based on what this graph is showing us on a log scale,
yes,
what will Bitcoin's peak be at the next cycle?
So this is the next peak, right? So here, so I will say close to 200, close to 200. Let's take the worst case scenario that it continues to do this mathematical trend. The peaks are on an exponential decay, so you can calculate what will be the next peak based on that, at least 150,000. So I'm pretty sure of it.
And that's in what year?
Middle of 2025.
And what happens in 10 years?
Everybody wants to know when it is a million, right? So let me tell you that it will be 1 million in 2033. So July of 2033.
Now, I'm generally kind of skeptical, and I think to myself, but Giovanni, couldn't you draw a line through just about any set of data points? Like if you mapped out gold or the stock market and you drew it on a log scale, wouldn't you be able to draw a line straight through that and find some kind of pattern? Turns out, you can't, and he ran the numbers. Here's gold, for example, over a 35-year period on a log scale. You can't draw a line through it in any linear kind of way that shows a pattern because there is no power law in time here. Also, here's the S&P 500 over a 70-year period. You almost can if you don't start from the beginning, and that might be a function of leaving the gold standard and inflation. But here's the crazy part that I left out. All the lines that you saw drawn in all these graphs were not drawn by human hands. Giovanni doesn't look at these graphs and thinks, there's a pattern here, I think I'll draw a line through it. All the lines that were drawn as functions of mathematical formulas that are way over my head, but Giovanni did show me that there's a way to measure the accuracy of these models based on something called regression, which is the R-squared number. Now, in Bitcoin's case, for this model, it's 0.953. In layman's terms, that translates to 95.3% accuracy when applying all this data to its regression. In other words, its past 15-year history. And no other asset even comes close to that.
We are dealing, if this hypothesis that we are dealing with a power law is true, is not another formula. It's something very intrinsic to the system that it's almost like a fingerprint for the system. And the system will continue to do that in the future. In fact, as it grows, it should be even more stable. It's more difficult to change it. It's such a big network that it cannot be gamed.
Again, not a precise prediction, more of a ballpark number. But you can think about this kind of stuff more like predicting the climate. See, weather patterns are really hard to tell because they fluctuate day to day. But the climate is that long-term trend that we can predict. And that's sort of what these models are doing, and if Bitcoin continues to follow the power law like it has been for the last 15 years, then all of this should theoretically be accurate. But the question is, will this actually happen? Here's my opinion. I'm not a mathematician and I am not an astrophysicist, and you're not gonna find the answer from a dude that looks like Harry Potter. Everything I've shown you in this video, I learned from making this video after spending an embarrassing amount of time researching for it, so I don't think my opinion is gonna be very insightful or very valuable, but I wouldn't be very surprised if Bitcoin's price followed some kind of a power law. Now, as someone who has bought Bitcoin and held it for a long time now, one of my biggest worries is that Bitcoin was just a trend that would maybe eventually go away. But I think that worries disappeared once they approved the spot Bitcoin ETF, which tells me that Bitcoin is a new asset class and it's here to stay because it's been approved by the traditional financial markets. Now, my worry today is that for a lot of people, Bitcoin is almost like a religion, which I don't really care for that part, but I can look beyond it. Now, past that point though, I think Bitcoin is, for the first time in human history, something that combines technological, psychological, societal, financial, and macroeconomic concepts all into one thing that you can buy 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So maybe Bitcoin's price is not a function of randomness, but instead, it's a power law that follows complex networks that exhibit very complex human behaviors. So maybe in 10 years, Bitcoin could be worth $1 million, or maybe this is completely wrong. But I'd love to know if you could find this video 18 months from 2024 after the halving, when we'll know more data. And I'd love to see 10 years into the future if you ever stumble on this video. I want to give credit to physicist Geoffrey West, who's published incredible amounts of research into this, Michael from Vsauce, who has a way better video about power laws, Francisco Rodriguez for his article on Medium, and of course I want to thank Dr. Giovanni Socials for letting me pick his brain and making the connection between power laws and Bitcoin, and I'm going to leave the entire 1.5 hour conversation that we had if you're a nerd and you want to listen to it, as well as all the resources that I used for this video, if you want to make your head spin, but in a good way. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Smash the like button, subscribe if you haven't already. Don't forget to grab your free stocks. Links are down below, and then go track them automatically with the spreadsheet link down below in my Patreon. Love you. Thank you so much for watching this video. I'd love to see you back here on Monday and Friday.